What's up, folks? Spiderfly back again on the World Wide Web. Different setup. Again, still not in Boogie Draw's studio. We're doing this kind of thing now. This video is also recorded, even though chronologically it's probably going to be up first, this was recorded before, or after, sorry, it was recorded after the character creation video, because I shot the whole character creation video in my porch and then realized I hadn't actually gone over like what the stats are in the game in any way whatsoever. So we're going to do that in this video. This is going to be chapter 1 in this series. We're going to talk about just the really basic rules of the game, how to roll dice, what the different stats do, everything that's kind of in section 1 of this book. Yeah. You're also going to notice that the audio quality is not better than it was before. That's because I spent all afternoon trying to set up a microphone, only to realize that the microphone I have really does not capture audio any better than this old iPhone is. So for the time being, until I justify spending a bunch of money on whatever, a specific mic just for this, you're stuck with this quality. Sorry, not a professional YouTuber. Okay, so we're gonna start with section 1, making ends meet. You're gonna say, wait, Spiderfly, section 1 isn't the first section, that's section 0. Well, section 0 is all lore. I'm gonna do lore videos later. These videos for right now are just for people trying to play the game for the first time that just want a resource for all that stuff. More lore in the future, hopefully. Okay. This is take like 500. I'm having so much trouble shooting this video just because every system in this game is interconnected, and so it's hard to find a place to start without covering everything. But we're gonna try, we're gonna figure it out. I swear it's not that complicated of a game. I swear it's not that hard. So I tried starting with stats. It didn't work. I tried starting with skill checks. It didn't really make sense. So I guess let's start with skill checks again. As I said in a previous cut, which probably didn't make it, skill checks are like the bones of any TTRPG system. How do you do basic things in the game? Let's break it down. So first things first, there are 3 types of skill check made in Geto Ratz. They are pretty much all done on a d20. If you want to make a skill check in Geto Ratz, you are rolling on a d20, adding your relevant skill, and trying to get a 10 or higher. If you roll less than a 10, it's a fail. If you roll higher than a 10 or on a 10, it's a success. A natural 1 is always a failure, no matter what your bonus is. And if you roll a 20 or higher, it's just kind of seen as really good. I know a lot of systems these days, it's like succeed with advantage, succeed with disadvantage type of stuff. I don't always generally use that. You can kind of apply that here, but normally in Geto Ratz you don't get like a bonus for rolling a 20 or higher unless you're like in combat, or unless it's like there's degrees of success, like you're gathering information, maybe you get a little bit more information than you would have had you just rolled a 12 or something like that. It's kind of up to Zone Master interpretation. But that's it. D20, 10 or higher. There's a lot of bonuses you're going to be adding. There's a lot of penalties you're going to need to be applying. I don't generally feel the need to include difficulty values. There's a system for it in the game. It's called increasing the tension, which is where you just kind of say you're going to need to roll higher than normal in order to succeed this. You can do it. I do it sometimes, but for reasons we'll get into later, I don't really find it necessary most of the time. Okay, so 3 skill checks in this game, all made on a d20. What are they? The first is what is called a primary skill check. What is a primary skill check? It is a skill check on a d20. You succeed on a 10 or higher, and you're rolling with a +1 for every point in the relevant stat. If you have 5 points in a stat, you're rolling a d20 plus 5. If you have 3 points in a stat, you're rolling a d20 plus 3. Let's say I've got 5 points in a stat, I rolled a 4. 4 plus 5 is 9. I did not succeed. Again, I rolled a 6. 6 plus 5 is 11. I succeeded. Super straightforward, not reinventing the wheel. The second type of skill check, which is less common, and is the one that people usually get a bit more confused about, so I'll just try and be very clear about what it is the secondary skill check. All that a secondary skill check is, that's different from a primary skill check, is that instead of rolling with a +1 for every point in the relevant stat, you roll with a +1 for every 2 points in the relevant stat. So let's say I have 5 points in a stat, and I have to roll a secondary skill check. I am rolling with a +2. I have 5 points, 1 for every 2 points. On every even number, you could think of it that way too. I get a +1. So I've got 5 points in a stat, rolling a secondary skill check. That's a 12 plus 2 is a 14. I succeeded. Not rocket science. The last one is what is called a contested skill check. A contested skill check is the only time really where rolling a 10 or under a 10 doesn't really matter. A contested skill check is when 2 parties are rolling, sometimes with the same stats, sometimes with different stats, and it doesn't matter what you roll, you just have to roll higher than the other person. So let's say I've got 5 points in the relevant stat, the person I'm rolling against has 2 points in the relevant stat. Rolling 2 d20s, the guy I'm up against rolled a 13, plus 2 is 15. We rolled a 17, plus 5 is 22. And here's why rolling 20 or higher is kind of good. It's because if you're up against lower level obstacles or NPCs, sometimes they can't roll higher than a 20. So if you can roll a 17, that turns into a 22, they might not be able to even, beat it. So it's a good advantage to have. On a tie, you re-roll. It's not, the initiator, whatever. If you tie on a contested skill check, you re-roll until the tie is broken. If you end up rolling for 100 years through some freak mathematical accident, I'm sorry. But that's how it works in this game. So yeah, no target number, none of that matters, roll higher than the opponent. It also here lists assisted skill checks. That's a lot of S's. What's an assisted skill check? So let's say you wanted to attempt a skill, and someone else in your party is like, oh, can I help? No, you can't. Yeah, you can help. So what does that look like? So let's say the person who wants to attempt it, as we still have a +5 in this stat. Our friend, the other party member, has +2 to this stat. Either of us could roll for it. Generally, you want the person with more points in the stat to attempt it, because why wouldn't you? And what the assistance does is it just gives you 1 reroll, because you have 1 or more people helping you do something. When this applies is kind of up to the zone master. Sometimes you might not allow it in different circumstances, but generally speaking, if I rolled, okay, so that's a 12, plus 5 is a 17. If I wanted to, I could re-roll to try to get higher, but we already succeeded on a pretty high number, so we're probably not worried about it. but because someone was assisting us, we could re-roll if we wanted to. Usually the rule of thumb is it doesn't matter how many people are assisting, you just get one re-roll. If you have a whole bunch of people helping, you can maybe give more, but if you have like 3 re-rolls and stuff, it's like at that point, should you even bother rolling? At that point, you can probably just say you succeed. There's like 7 people crowded around trying to like rebuild somebody's PC or something like that. So okay, we did it. Those are skill checks in Geto Ratz. Skill checks are also specifically you're rolling to succeed at something with a stat. There are going to be other rolls you make, rolls like damage, rolls like weapon performance, like does your weapon break, stuff of that nature. These are not skill checks. And so there's a lot of certain things that are like, you can re-roll this, you can re-roll that. Skill checks are affected by this. If it's not a skill check, it doesn't apply. That might sound obvious. But let's say you have a -3 to all skill checks from an injury, and you're rolling damage. Damage, even though it can be tied to a stat, is not a skill check because it's not your character doing it, it is like the weapon doing it. You're wielding the weapon, but, you know, basic stuff like that. Skill checks, D20s, apply your stats, whether it's 1 for every 1 or 1 for every 2, 10 or higher, or if you're contested by somebody else, beat their roll. Super simple stuff. So we talked about skill checks. Awesome. Cool. Now let's talk about stats. All your skills are tied to different stats. So let's get into what the stats are in Geto Ratz. In Geto Ratz, there are 10 stats. A lot of games have less than that. A lot of games these days I find have like rules-like games of like 3 to 4 stats, sometimes 5 on the high end. Certain skill-based games will have like 40-something unique skills, which are tied to like a, maybe 8 core stats or something like that. To avoid that, there are 10 stats in Geto Ratz, enough that characters can pretty noticeably diversify their skill sets and be, unique kinds of builds, but not so many that it's like ridiculously overwhelming and like hard to wrap your head around. These stats have a lot of overlap. That is intentional because unlike certain games, because the stats are so kind of broad, when they apply to different skill checks is up to interpretation. So the example I always use is fleeing. Your party, they just pulled off the heist. They're spilling out into the street, they're bloodied, they're battered, and they have to get back to their safe house. But, oh no, MetSec is after them, closing in, police raptors overhead, searchlights, attack dogs. How do they get out of it? There isn't one way to flee. So let's say your character with a lot of speed wants to use their speed to get away by running really fast. Sure, they're rolling speed to run away. Makes sense. Maybe your character with high reflexes wants to hide, dive into a dumpster in a back alley and wait for the cops to pass by. Or maybe lose them in a big crowd of people. That's also fine. Rolling stealth to get away. That makes sense. Maybe the person with high muscle wants to use athletics to scale up the side of a building and then leap between rooftops and like monkey bars over like power lines and stuff like that. That is also fine. All of those would be valid. And it can even go further. Like maybe your character with a high personality wants to persuade a random person to let them hide in their house while the police go by. They're like, oh, the police are trying to kill me. You have to hide me. You have to help me out. I'm just trying to whatever. That could, maybe the zone master says, no, that doesn't make sense. You're covered in blood and you have a machine gun. That's not going to happen. Maybe instead they say they want to roll grit to intimidate someone into hiding them. That could work too. So it's less about like, there isn't going to be like a universal rule all the time of this applies all the time. it's going to be up to the Zone Master, but then also up to the player to argue their case. If the Zone Master says, okay, I need you to roll Street Smarts to see if you can navigate this area, and instead one player's going to go, I don't have any Street Smarts, but I have a lot of personality. Could I roll personality to try and ask around, get directions from locals, and navigate it using that? Then it's up to the Zone Master to say, in this situation, yes, or in this situation, no. Just because they rolled yes once doesn't mean they're going to roll yes every time. Just because they rolled no once doesn't mean they're going to roll no every single time. But you always want to make a case. In this game, we usually call it an angle. What's your angle? If you can justifiably explain why you can use a certain stat, then go for it, is basically what the game says. You want to play to your character's strengths. It makes sense. Every character is going to approach the same situation differently based on their experiences and their relevant skills, right? So, you don't want every single person to be doing everything the exact same. That doesn't make sense. Okay. So went over skill checks, went over primary, secondary, went over, we call it umbrella skills in this game, just the idea that, one action could be covered by multiple different stats. Now we're going to start with the actual stats themselves. I tried reading them front to back in the order that they appear and forgot how many weird exceptions there are at the very first stats that are introduced. So we're actually going to go back to front. We're going to start with the last listed stats and then end on the first ones, just because it's easier for this kind of format to explain. Yeah, okay, so first things first. The weirdest, goofiest stat in Geto Ratz, weird. What is weird? Weird is your character's attunement to kind of the occult and the supernatural. Specifically weird is for spellcasters. You're probably thinking, there's magic in Geto Ratz? Oh yeah, there is. We're not going to get into the lore of it right now. I'm going to do lore videos more down the line, but generally speaking, what weird is, it's your character's attunement and also their tolerance to ghost radiation, which is kind of like the mana of this world. It is the ethereal energy that you can harness as a resource to do supernatural or occult stuff. And yes, it is radiation. It is bad for you. That's kind of the fun niche about wizards in this world, is they are sickly, irradiated husks that are communing with sentient radiation, taking on the forms of dead people to cause weird chemical reactions and mess with the world around them and make people go insane and stuff. That's the broad strokes of magic in this game. It's not cool or mythical, it's pretty horrific. But weird is your character's ability to interact with that. So, the primary skill under weird is called anomaly. It is just, anomaly is what you roll to cast spells. It is what you roll to defend against spells. It is also what you would roll to try and sense are there any vengeful spirits nearby? Can I detect any freaky monsters hiding in the shadows? Can I interpret omens? Stuff like that. To be 100% honest, if you're not a spellcaster, weird is not going to be relevant to your character very often. It's a lot more of a specialized stat. It is pretty much for spellcasting. It's not for very much else. There's certain weapons that scale with it and stuff like that, but generally speaking, if you're not going to be a wizard, you don't really have to worry about weird. So a lot of people don't. But if you do want to interact with the magic system, it is pretty essential. The secondary skill under weird is what is called +1 max mutagens. You're going to notice right away that the secondary skill is not actually for skill checks. That is true for a lot of these stats. a lot of the time the secondary skill isn't really for making skill checks. I guess you still could roll it, like roll secondary weird would be like kind of the equivalent to doing like a higher difficulty class or something like that. But a lot of them aren't a skill in the sense of you're rolling it to make skill checks. It is just relevant to kind of like your character sheet. So max mutagens, a mutagen is sort of just, think of it as like how much radiation can be in your character's body before they start to die. The base is 1. You start with 0 out of 1. And as you store more spells on or in your body, as you enchant more items, they take up mutagens. You could kind of think of it as like spell slots. It's just how many spells you can kind of fit in your body before you start to like rot alive. Pretty straightforward. Okay. So the next stat we're going to talk about is weapons handling. Another kind of really specific one. The ones at the end are. Weapons handling is pretty self-explanatory. It's how good your character is with weapons, stuff like guns, rocket launchers, artillery, chain knives, bows. It doesn't really matter. If it's a weapon, if your character is high weapons handling, they're going to be good with it. The primary skill under weapons handling is called Killing Power, and what it does is for every point in weapons handling, you do +1 damage with every single weapon in the game. This doesn't apply for like fist fighting and stuff like that, but if you're using a knife, if you're using a gun, if you're using any kind of weapon, a brick, doesn't matter. +1 damage for every point in weapons handling. If you have 6 points of weapons handling, you do +6 damage on every attack you make with a weapon. The secondary skill under weapons handling is called Precision. It is +1 accuracy with every weapon in the game. Doesn't matter. So let's say the weapon we're using has an innate +1 accuracy. A lot of them have just inherent accuracy bonuses. And let's say we have 5 points in weapons handling. So first we're going to roll to make our attack. That is a +1 for every 2 points. We have 5 points, so we have +2. Then we add the +1 the weapon has. We're rolling a d20 +3. That's a 5. We miss. If we did hit, let's say this weapon does d20 damage for the sake of argument. We have 5 points in weapons handling, so it'd be a d20 +5. That would have been 22 damage. Just a simple, damage is like, there's going to be, it might be like 12d6 for damage. It might be 3d10. It might be 4d20. It might be 1d20. You just apply your weapons handling bonus to the total of that attack. You add +1 accuracy on every attack for every 2 points. Nice and simple. But I forgot how long this was going to take, but it's okay. We're getting there. We're getting through it. 2 down, only 8 more to go. Oh, okay. I swear it's not complicated, guys. I swear it's an easy game. Okay, so the next stat we're going to talk about is book smarts. It is sort of a representation of like how we traditionally view intelligence. It's basically kind of like your character's IQ. How smart are they when it comes to like technology, studying, research, whatever. I don't know. You can tell I'm not a book smart person. Not my highest stat. I tell you that much. So the primary skill under book smarts is called technical. It is just general if you're using a data knife, which is kind of like the hacker tools of this world. You get a bonus equal to your technical skill. If you're trying to use medical supplies, so you want to like use a med kit to heal somebody, that's going to be technical. It could be like trying to harvest an old machine for spare parts. It could be repairing an item. It could be searching through a library to find relevant information. Doesn't really matter. If it feels like being a learned individual would help, you usually apply technical. The secondary skill check under book smarts is, I believe, called innovation. Yes, innovation is specifically what you roll when you are repairing. So like if you're trying to put a sword back together with a repair kit, if you're trying to fix an old engine. More specifically, innovation is anytime your character is like crafting something. There's crafting in this game? Oh yeah, there's crafting in this game. I love that system so much. So yeah, innovation is just more like technical is kind of like your general knowledge of just relevant kind of stuff that the average person maybe wouldn't know, because it's not something the average person would have like experience with in this world. Innovation is like really honing in on those skills. So if I had 3 points of book smarts, I wanted to roll an innovation check, I would have a +1 on a d20. I rolled a 16. That's a 17. That passes. I just crafted that pipe bomb. Heck yeah. The one other funny rule with book smarts is what we call a memory check. This is just a mean rule I put in the game to bully my players. But if you have a player where they forget, like in real life, like what the name of an NPC was, or like what they were supposed to be doing on a quest, sometimes I make their character roll just primary book smarts. We call the memory check to see if their character can remember what they were supposed to be doing, just so I can be a jerk. You don't have to really run that, but I think it's funny that it's in there. Next one, probably my favorite, or at least one of my favorites, personality. Personality, if I really wanted to dumb it down, is like your character's charisma stat, but it's so much more. Personality is your character's ability to interact with other human beings, whether that is through raw, charismatic, preternatural, like people are just drawn to them. They're just like larger than life. That could be personality, but it could also be just that your character knows how to get what they want. You could be the least liked, most untrustworthy person ever and have high personality and still be able to kind of like trick people. People can know you're going to lie to them. Like they could look at you and be like, that guy's absolutely going to betray me. But a high personality character just kind of gets away with it anyway because they know what makes people tick. You could even look at like Patrick Bateman as a high personality character because he is not naturally charismatic or anything like that, but he just kind of is good at manipulating people. So it doesn't have to be that your character's charismatic or likable. It can be that. That's super cool, but it can also just be like, this character is good at getting what they want. So the primary skill under personality is called persuasion. Super simple. You want to convince somebody to do what you want in a way that is a bit more, milk and honey. Like you're not just like, I'm going to kill you if you don't do what I'm asking. It's a little bit more, there's a bit more finesse to it. It's almost like getting people to do what you want them to do without them knowing you want them to do it. So persuasion roll. Let's say I wanted to convince the shopkeeper to give me a discount. I've got 3 personality, so I'm rolling with a +3 because it's a primary skill check. That's a 6 + 3 is a 9. Not quite enough to charm him. There is more to the social skill system. That'll be in the social skills chapter. There's different types of, kind of persuasion rolls you can make. It's not always just roll d20 to get what I want. But that's just kind of the general basic rule. The secondary skill under under personality, and it says here, even the Reaper has his favorites, and that's kind of the idea. Personality in a lot of ways is about your character being larger than life. And so for every 2 points in personality, your character gets a +1 to what is called cheat death. What is cheat death? That's kind of like your death saving throw. The more charismatic and larger than life, or just lucky that this character is, it just seems like they just can't die. Like they almost can't help it. Like they're not the most skilled guy on the battlefield, but somehow they just keep getting away with it. That's what +1 to cheat death is. That's what the secondary skill is under personality. The next one, we'll just get through it really quickly, is bulk. How big is your character, just physically? Not necessarily tough, not necessarily, muscular. Just how big are you? The primary skill under bulk, and bulk is kind of a weird one because it's actually like the only one where you don't roll with it almost ever. I'll sometimes make characters roll like opposed bulk checks if they're like going over like a rickety bridge or something like that, or like climbing up a rusted ladder to see if it breaks underneath them, or like if the floor breaks beneath them and they fall into like a den of twisters or something like that. You roll with it sometimes for like grappling and stuff like that. But generally speaking, you don't roll bulk as a skill. So what does it do? Well, the primary skill under bulk is +2 carry capacity. Boo! Super lame. No one likes carry capacity in games. It's useful. You start with 20, we call them slots. It's just like an abstract measurement. You start with 20. For every point in bulk, you get +2. So if you have, 3 points in bulk, 26 slots as opposed to 20. Lets you carry more items on your person. It is helpful, but no one's taking it for that, right? So what's the secondary skill under bulk? It better be good to make me waste all those points on carry capacity. I don't even get to roll it for skill checks. And that's because it is really good. For every 2 points in bulk, you get +10 to your max blood. Blood is your hit points in this game. To kind of give context, the average character, like at the start of the game, has 30 blood or 30 hit points. So for every 2 points in bulk, it goes up by 10. That is quite significant, especially considering like with how damage works in this game, you can, even with 30 blood, like 30 hit points, you could still go down in 2, 3, 4 attacks easily. You get hit a couple times, it could be over. So those first, even 2 points in bulk, the difference between 30 blood and 40 blood is like huge. 30 blood to 50 blood is crazy. After that, it kind of plateaus a little bit. There are certain guys who make builds where their character's whole thing is just having like 80 to 100 blood, and then having like reduced damage and stuff like that. That can be kind of fun and a bit silly and whatever, but that's basically what bulk is. More hit points, more carry capacity. Okay, 4 stats left to go. So the next one is one I actually skipped over by accident. Oops, what are you gonna do? Click off the video! And that would be street smarts. Okay, so if book smarts is, information that the average person maybe wouldn't have access to without like an education or some kind of formal training or something like that, street smarts is information a character wouldn't have access to if they aren't really from this area. So like a character from the Blacks who's lived their whole life behind the walls might have a good education. They might have had a good upbringing. They might be literate, so they're going to have more book smarts. A character from the zone isn't less intelligent. They just would have kind of a different base set of skills. So what is street smarts? The primary skill for street smarts is awareness, which is just generally kind of like being able to pick up stuff on in your surroundings, having eyes in the back of your head, always being on the lookout. It's also got what we call underworld knowledge kind of tied as well as the primary skill, which is going to be like sort of the who's who on the streets of the zone. Does that name ring any bells? Does that location have kind of a bad reputation or history? Who runs this side of the city? Should we avoid this street? That kind of thing. So when would you roll that? Could be gathering information. It could be kind of getting a background check on like an NPC's introduced and you're going to go, oh, have I heard of this NPC? And you can roll your street smarts. It could also be like fleeing. Maybe you're trying to escape from a corporate mercenary team and you decide, I'm from this neighborhood. I probably know the streets and the alleyways and the dead ends better than this, military unit from behind the walls. And so you might roll street smarts to get away in that way. It's very versatile. We call it kind of your money maker, your bread and butter, because a lot of the side hustles in this game, the way that you make money on the side between missions and quests, is going to be tied to street smarts. It also has a lot of combat scaling because a lot of the early game weapons are tools that the average person in the zone would know how to use. The secondary skill under street smarts is your commit crime skill. For every 2 points in street smarts, you have a +1 to things like picking locks, hot wiring cars, breaking into buildings, and things of that nature. Certain things like hacking or even, the DLC like crafting drugs and stuff like that, you can sometimes also attempt with commit crime. But because it's a secondary check, you'll usually be better at doing it with book smarts, but the overlap can kind of be there. It maybe doesn't sound like all that much, but street smarts is one of my favorite stats. It's also one of the ones that you're probably going to be rolling a lot more than you would think. It can really help tie a character into the setting and the world. Next up is grit. We kind of refer to personality and grit as the two social stats. They're kind of your stats that you roll most often when interacting with other people. Like we said before, personality is more about getting people to do what you want through coercion or through flattery or through charm or through manipulation. Grit is getting people to do what you want because you're scary. People generally don't like being intimidated as much as they like people just kind of asking them to do something or telling them they should do something. But it is what it is. So the primary skill under grit is called perseverance. It's also sometimes called intimidation. Perseverance is like resisting incoming stress. So if you're about to take stress, maybe the zone master has you roll grit, and if you pass a grit check, you're going to take less stress. Maybe you're going down against a monster and don't want to become panicked by one of its abilities, so you're rolling grit to try and stay cool and stay calm. Maybe you're rolling grit to intimidate somebody into giving up information that you need, or really anything like that. Any kind of skill check where it would make sense that your kind of nastiness is going to help in that situation. The secondary skill under grit is a +1 to your character's maximum stress. Stress is your character's mental health. For every 2 points in grit, your mental health capacity to all the horrible things that you're going to be witnessing, and more importantly, the horrible things you're going to be doing, having grit is going to help a lot in a life of crime, in a post-apocalyptic slum. It's not an easy life that you're going to be living, and people with high grit are just more adapted or kind of desensitized to the stuff that they're going to be doing. So, if your character's been in the military, if he was a hitman, you might even have people roll grit checks for if they're able to go through with certain things. If they're intimidated by somebody, or even if it's you're sent out to kill somebody and you don't think that it's the right thing to do. Maybe you're going to roll a grit check to see if you can even go through with it. It's a lot more of a role play kind of stat. A lot of people posture. A lot of people in the zone are going to tell you that they're tougher or scarier than they are. Grit is kind of like actually backing up all of those claims. Okay, so next up, reflexes. Reflexes is kind of like your finesse and control over your own body, being nimble, being maneuverable, your reaction time, stuff like that. It has a lot of overlap with other stats. The primary skill under reflexes is stealth. It's going to be what you roll if you're sneaking around, if you're trying to, but you can sometimes use it for climbing. If you want to scale up the side of a building, sometimes reflexes could be good for that. If you want to drop down through like a skylight, climb down a rope, and you duck into the shadows, that could all be like a reflexes skill check. The secondary skill under reflexes is a +1 to your character's evasion. So for every 2 points in reflexes, your character is a -1 to being hit by all incoming attacks. That might not sound that crazy. It's kind of the closest thing you're going to get to like an armor class, because there isn't really armor class in this game. So if you want to be harder to hit, reflexes is good for that. The other thing that it's really good for is making it so enemies crit against you less often. If somebody rolls a 20 to hit you and you have 2 points in reflexes, all of a sudden that's not a critical strike anymore. That could be really useful. It's also good, like if someone hits you on a 10, -1, that attack would normally have hit, but it just barely misses. The most important thing, though, with evasion is, and this is more getting into like the combat chapter, so I won't do too much about it, but if you don't have the resources, if you don't have the drive, the kind of action points in the game, to do things like dodge and defend against incoming attacks, if you're just out there in the open like a sitting duck, sorry, my arm is itchy, deal with it. It can be just like a passive, really useful thing where you don't even have to do anything to avoid attacks. They're just like whizzing past you. It's good for that kind of stuff. It also has a lot of other secondary applications, stuff like driving cars is with reflexes. A lot of weapons, like high-level weapons, scale with reflexes. Stealth attacks can be useful. It can be good for sneaking away, though. Like, it can come up quite a lot. Maybe more than you would think. In a game about being a criminal, being stealthy is pretty useful. Speed. Speed is a monster of a stat. It's one of those stats that's going to be good, kind of like bulk, with like no matter what your build is, no matter what it is you're trying to do, speed is going to be very, very useful. The primary skill under speed is momentum. Momentum is just movement, moving fast. Reflexes is moving in a way that's nimble, that's coordinated. Speed is just getting out of there. It's good for fleeing. You can flee with speed. There's certain actions, like if you're trying to like search a room really quick before the police kick in the door, try and find something useful before you're jumping out the window. Speed can be good for that. Sometimes you might roll speed to see if you can like draw your weapon faster than an enemy. I don't know, it can be useful in a lot of situations. But the main thing that speed is good for is it is one of the 2 stats that you roll to dodge with. So if you have an incoming attack that hits on a 13, you might want to roll with +1 for every point in speed to beat that accuracy check and avoid that attack. You're probably already thinking, but if I have a bunch of points in reflexes, all these attacks against me are penalized, and then if I also have points in speed, I can dodge those same attacks easier that have a harder time hitting? Absolutely. That's where reflexes is kind of good as like a complementary stat. If you're already hard to hit and you have a lot of bonuses to dodging, that can combo together really well and just make it so you're almost never taking damage at all. The secondary skill under speed is a +1 to your drive. Drive is its whole own thing. That'll be more in the combat video, but just to kind of give a brief overview, drive is sort of like your character's stamina. Functionally in the game, drive is like action points. So in combat, you roll You don't roll initiative, you roll to see how many action points or drive you have. And for every 2 points in speed, you get +1 to that roll. Every point of drive is like another action you can take. Some actions cost more drive, some cost less. But speed lets you have more actions in combat, which is super, super powerful. Even at low levels, like one extra drive can make all the difference. At high levels, like having +3, +4 drive can be really, really powerful and make you a huge threat in combat. It's also more drive you can spend defending, dodging. It is really, really, really good to have, no matter what you're doing, even if you're not doing a combat character, because it also applies to driving. It applies to a lot of different things. Lastly, the first one on the list, muscle. Muscle is your character's athleticism and their brute strength. So what does that look like? The primary skill under muscle is athletics. It's what you are rolling to scale up a building, to lift a heavy object, kick down a door, drag your friend out of harm's way to safety, leaping between rooftops, anything where it makes sense that your character being athletic and in shape would apply. It is good for that. The other primary ability under muscle, because muscle's the weird one, because muscle's kind of a jack of all trades, master of none. It's really good for a bunch of hyper-specific situations, but doesn't have a whole lot of application outside of that. So +1 to athletics checks, whenever that applies, +1 damage in hand-to-hand combat. So this isn't including melee weapons or anything like that. It's just +1 damage whenever you are brawling, so kicking, punching, elbows, headbutting, any of that kind of stuff. You get a flat +1 damage for every point in muscle. Essential if you're going to be like a fist fighter, street fighter kind of build. You also dodge with muscle. So whichever one's higher, your speed or your muscle, you're rolling that +1 for every point in that stat to beat the accuracy checks of incoming attacks. So you can dodge with muscle, you can dodge with speed. Muscle lets you do more damage in hand-to-hand. It also lets you do certain skill checks and stuff like that. The secondary skill under muscle is a +1 to your max condition. Condition, if blood is your hit points, trauma tracks injuries, stress is mental health. Condition is like your health, like are you eating enough food, are you getting enough sleep, are you dehydrated, are you succumbing to infection, stuff like that. Again, condition's vital, I'm going to get more into later, but that's it. Those are the 10 stats. Weird. Weapons handling, book smarts, street smarts, grit, personality, reflexes, speed, muscle, and bulk in no real particular order. These are the bread and butter of the game. Okay, so the next thing we're going to talk about really briefly are the dice tables. There's a little section called dice tables in the book. It's just all the different dice that this game is going to ask you to roll. Most of them are self-explanatory, some of them are not. So I'm just going to go over it really quick to make sure it's obvious. D20, 20-sided die. You're going to mostly be rolling these. D10s are mainly just for tables and for damage. If you don't have a D10, you can roll a D20, divide it by 2, round up to the nearest whole number if you want. But if you have D10s handy, you should probably use them. D6s, you're going to use these a lot for things like drive. They're mostly a combat die, side hustles. You're going to roll them, 2d6. If anything's annotated as like a number and then the D and then another number, that's how many of that die. 2d20 is 2 20-sided dice, 4d6 is 4 6-sided dice, 3d10 is going to be 3 10-sided dice, etc. If you played other games, you know that already, probably. But then we get into the weird ones. So D3, if you played like Warhammer 40k, because my friends are obsessed with Warhammer 40k, you're going to know what a D3 is. It is a 6-sided die. You roll it, and then you divide it by 2, rounding up to the nearest whole number. So I rolled a 6 on a D3. That is a 3. If I rolled a 5 on a D3, that would also be a 3. I rolled a 2. So on a D3, that would be a 1. 1 and 2 are 1. 3 and 4 are 2. 5 and 6 are 3. It might seem a little unintuitive at first, but you get used to it pretty quickly. A D2. A D2 is just an odds or evens check. You can flip a coin. You can roll any die, and, you know, you can have a hard rule of, like, in the game, it usually says that odds is a fail, evens is a success. What I almost always do when I'm using a D2, which is just like blind chance, is I will make the person rolling it call odds or evens, and then whatever they call, if they roll that, that's a success. If they roll the other one, that's a fail. So if I'm rolling a D2, I'm going to call odds. I rolled a 1, I would succeed. It doesn't matter what die you use for it, really. Flipping a coin can also be fun, but I like to save and spend my money, so. Last one is any of these that doesn't make sense generally. So a D30, you're not rolling a 30-sided die. You are rolling the closest equivalent. So it would be, in this case, a D3 is the closest to a D30. And you're rolling a D3 times 10. You don't have to use a number generator for a 30-sided whatever. No, D30 is D3 times 10. It's usually for stuff like damage on really big weapons. So that's a 4 on a D3. That would be a 2. 2 times 10 is 20 damage. D60 is the same thing. D6 times 10. A D100 is not using percentile dice. We don't use percentile dice in this game, really. A D100 is a D10 times 10. A D1000 would be D10 times 100. A D200 might be D20 times 10, or that would be a D2000. I don't know. It might seem weird. It's just a specific thing to this game. The closest die times 10 is what those are. It's not percentage based. It's not, you know, between 1 and 100. It's 1 to 10 times 10. In this, it almost only applies for damage, and it specifically almost only applies to like rail guns and like rocket launchers and land mines and things that would do ridiculous amounts of damage that wouldn't do just like 1 damage, 5 damage. It's like having like 10 as the lowest you can roll. Okay, so the last thing I've got here to talk about is Zeal. Zeal is... You see systems like this a lot in TTRPGs now. It's not super unique. It's just kind of the way we do it in this game. There's 2 ways to do it. So what is Zeal? Zeal is a fit of inspiration or just overwhelming passion or almost like a force pushing your character beyond what they would normally be able to do. Functionally, it is your character being inspired or motivated enough to kind of ignore whatever skill check you just failed. So the base system of Zeal, and I'll grab this right now, we like to use little tokens. So like, as an example, it might be a bottle cap or a coin or anything. It doesn't matter what it is, a poker chip. If you get Zeal, you usually get Zeal through certain foods might give you Zeal. If you eat a really delicious food, you might get Zeal. If you drink a tasty soda, you might get Zeal. But it's also from roleplay things. So if you've been traveling for weeks and you stay at this inn and you get a bath and you sleep on this comfy bed, your character is feeling restored again, you might get a Zeal for that. If your character goes by their mom's house and they have their favorite childhood meal made by their mom, they spend time with their family, that might give them a Zeal. I also like to say if your character is role-playing, like if a player is playing a character accurately, even if it's to the detriment of themselves or the party, if they're just so immersed in this character that they're like, guys, I'm sorry, I know this doesn't benefit us, but my character would behave this way, and not doing it in a way to just be a contrarian or be a jerk, but just to be like, this is good for the story. This is more interesting than just doing the intelligent thing. In moments like that, the Zone Master might also give out Zeal. Zeal, the basic or simple Zeal rules are you can play that token. I always say put it in the dice box, and you get a reroll. That's all that it is. If you fail a skill check, I just passed a skill check, but if I had failed it, I could play a Zeal and I could roll again. Super straightforward. Games like this, obviously the chance is a good thing. It's why we play them. It keeps it random. It's what separates it from just saying, I do this, I do that, and I do it well. But sometimes it's not satisfying. Sometimes the party favorite NPC dies in a throwaway encounter fighting like big rats, and it sucks, and it's not cool, and it really just kills the narrative you're trying to tell. Stuff like Zeal can really help put stuff like that in the hands of your party and really help kind of pull it back, and it feels way more satisfying. Generally, I say you can spend as much Zeal as you want on a roll. You might have a rule of like you can only spend 1 Zeal on a skill check. That's fine too if you want to go for a more grounded game. But there's something really fun about one character like going down and trying to pass their cheat death and failing, and every single person's like, I spent my Zeal, we have to keep this guy alive. We've spent 70 Zeal on this cheat death roll, why do you keep failing? It can be really fun to do that. The other version that it says folding in the heart of the cards, instead of having, you're going to watch me be terrible at shuffling cards. I know I'm going to try to look cool by shuffling, and then I'm going to drop them, and it's going to be super embarrassing. Whatever. The heart of the cards replaces a simple token reroll system, where for every point of Zeal, your character gets a playing card. And the value of that playing card determines what the special ability is. And it spells it all out right here. So let's say I just drew a 5. I just drew a 5 with this card. A 5 means I could play a -5 on any skill check. It could be my skill check. It could be a party skill check. Generally, it's going to be if an enemy rolls to hit and they hit on a 12, I can go, oh, I play my 5, and now that attack misses. That can be huge. I just drew an ace. An ace allows you to reroll. It makes those rerolls a lot more rare when you play with cards, but it also makes Zeal a lot more kind of, you can use it for a lot more stuff. It is cooler. People I find always prefer the card Zeal, but if you're playing online or if you're playing with new players, I always start with just the basic tokens. Because having people memorize all this is like super tedious and not great for new players. But once you have a more seasoned kind of party, it's really, really fun to just be handing out cards. The Zone Master with cards has their own Zeal, which really helps if you have like a boss fight and you're just rolling terrible and it makes your boss fight super embarrassing and lame. It's nice to have your own Zeal. If your party's doing a little too well and you want to like stunt them a little bit and introduce more challenge, being able to be like, oh, you hit the boss, hey? You actually miss. Or, oh, you got away from the cops super easy. You actually get cornered. Haha. It's super mean. You don't have to spend it against them either. You can also spend it to help them if you want. But that's kind of up to you. The thing with cards that's a bit different is, unlike with tokens, you can cancel out somebody else's Zeal. So let's say I roll an attack, I hit a player's character, and that player goes, oh, I play my 5, you don't hit. If I had a 5, I could play my 5 and say, I cancel out your 5, I hit anyway. And you kind of have like a meta game of like dueling cards on top of the combat that's going on or whatever, which can be kind of fun. This kind of leads into my favorite part about Zeal, which is the bribes. we've had a system called the bribe at my table, where I award players zeal if they do nice things for me in real life. I've had people give me money for zeal to get to reroll to keep their character alive. If people bring snacks or soda to the session, I always give them zeal. I've had people like order me food while we're running a game to be like, hey, if I bought you a sandwich from Subway and DoorDashed it over, would you give me zeal? And it's like, yeah, I would give you zeal if you did that. The oldest one was a shot. I know people say don't drink when you run these games. I don't as much anymore because it definitely makes it a lot harder to run a game. Playing it's hard enough, but even running a game intoxicated, very difficult. I wouldn't say that you should do this, but we had a rule for a long time of, you would have a combat that's going on for 2.5 hours. Halfway through the combat, you've had a bunch of beers, people are forgetting their abilities, and people start going down or missing really critical attacks, or things are just falling apart, and just being like, so, looks like you guys really could use some zeal, huh? It is so much fun. It's so funny. Like, I don't care if it's mean and super mean-spirited to be extorting your players for gifts and favors to keep their characters alive. It's so much fun. Or even if you want to be like, you're looking at a character who just failed their cheat death and they're like, oh my gosh, my character died. What am I gonna do? And you've got an ace in your hand and you don't want to just give them the ace for free because that would take away consequence. Just being like, looks like it would be really nice if someone had an ace to save you, huh? That's a nice looking bottle of bourbon on your shelf. If that's something, you should clear that kind of thing with your players before doing it. Obviously, don't just extort your players for your own benefit. But if you and your players do have that kind of relationship, it's super fun to extort them and just be like, I could save the whole party, but it's not going to be for free, But yeah, that's chapter 1, Making Ends Meet. This video was so much longer than I thought it was going to be. I'm so sorry. Hopefully the audio quality isn't terrible. Hopefully this isn't complete nonsense. But I did have fun recording this. This is, I think, going to be the setup. I might get a better mic at some point if people actually end up watching these videos, but until then, for like the 7 of you that have maybe seen this, hope this helps. This is all information you can kind of obviously get out of reading the book. I'm not trying to insinuate that like the book is so illegible that you would honestly probably have a better understanding of these mechanics by reading the book than listening to me ramble about them. But I kind of like the idea that you guys can get the benefit of like, okay, there's how it's written in the book, but how do I, the person who wrote the game, run these mechanics? How do they actually look at the table versus in theory? There's certain things in the game I'll get to in like future chapters where it's like, there is a hard rule for a mechanic, but I might never even acknowledge that rule. It's just when you write a rule book, things have to be clear. They have to make sense. There has to be rules for how these things work. You can't just say, there's mechanics for side hustles in this game, but then not give specifics. But I'll get into all that stuff later. Hopefully this was coherent. Hopefully it wasn't super unpleasant to watch. And hopefully it helped. If your Zone Master sent you this video, I'm sorry. That was pretty mean of them. If you're watching this video because you're running a session tomorrow or something like that, or this is your first time playing the game, you wanted to have kind of a basic understanding, that's so exciting. I really hope you have a good time. Either way, it means the world. And if you're watching videos like this to see if Geto Ratz is the right system for you, I get it's a huge risk to pick up a new system and actually get your players to want to run it. I hope this helped. This probably didn't help at all with you make up your mind whether or not you want to play this game, but hopefully future videos will be better at that kind of thing. Thanks again for watching. I had a lot of fun, and see you in the next one.